Hello, my name is Brandon Pasternak, and I am here today to talk about green energy. So this is something a lot of millennials and Gen Z are very passionate about, and I'll be honest, I'm a little passionate about it too. I mean, it does seem, in terms of, seems like a great, good feel moment. You know, you're thinking, solar power, wind power, uh, great for the world. Clean energy. It just seems like it's a very super heroic field. But I got some terrible news. Most of it is a complete lie. And the reason I say it's a complete lie, if you take things into account, such as solar or wind power, there's a lot of things we need to take into account other than just saying, oh, it has a zero net carbon. One of the things we need to take into account is the batteries, the lithium. The best places to find it is Argentina, China, Russia, and there's mines in the Middle East. And currently we do not have access to any of those. And we would be relying on foreign nations for our national security if we were to go full solar and wind power. So that would mean we'd be relying on the Russians to give us our energy needs. I don't know about you, but something tells me in 5 to 10 years after we would implement that, the Russians would say we are either out of it or we're just not going to trade it to you anymore. And we would be in a very bad position. For hydropower, it's great. It could get a lot of energy out of it, but the only issue is between the federal government, they say we have tapped all of our available rivers for high energy output. So in theory, great idea. We would either have to make some type of man-made river system to implement that again, or maybe come up with new designs to upgrade our current hydropower. But there is a saving grace. Nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is zero net carbon. It is an extremely reliable source of energy compared to wind or solar, which requires sunlight or wind power. We're all nuclear. You know exactly how much megawatts you are going to get at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you know how many megawatts you are going to get at 10 o'clock at night. It is a constant power source. So we're going to go through each of them one by one and talk about how their positives and their negatives. So wind power is just not a viable source for large energy production. One of the reasons is because, as a person who's passionate about green energy and have listened to arguments on the left side of the aisle, you guys often talk about overpopulation. So in terms of long-term energy production, it doesn't make sense. It takes about 7.7 square miles of land to power the same amount as 1 square mile of nuclear energy. So in terms of overpopulation, it doesn't make sense to go to nuclear energy or wind power in that, for instance, because they take up 7 times more land. Another thing we have to take into account are the solar panels themselves. I live in Illinois, and we have extreme weather in the winter and the summer. We get extremely hot in the summer and extremely cold in the winter. Every year, the solar panels lose about 1 to 2% of their capacity to hold or produce the energy, and that production gets cut even further due to the extreme weather. So we're looking about, in normal conditions, would be replacing these solar panels every 20 to 25 years, and we would be even looking at that even less in extreme weather climates, such as here in Illinois or you guys in California, New York. Any type of extreme weather, it's just going to completely destroy the solar panels even faster, and you have to take into account the batteries. I mean, in cold weather, you're going to lose charge a lot faster. You're not going to have perfect wind coverage. And then on top of that, there is this thing called plate energy that is on these solar panels themselves. So they say it produces 100 megawatts. Well, that is considered a scientific in the lab study number. That number is not practical in a regular setting. So they're saying that you're going to get 100 megawatts in 12 hours in perfect sunlight. Well, in the real world, we don't always have perfect sunlight. There's going to be cloud coverage. There could be in different types of the day. You're not going to have that perfect on-the-dot sun average. In terms of small-scale energy production, that's not too big of a deal if you're using it for a homestead or using it for your home. You'd be able to adjust with that because you'd be producing more energy than you would need. But in terms of large energy scale production, that's something that we can't have because, as everyone knows, we could use California for instance, during the summer last year, about a year and a half ago, during the height of COVID, they were having rolling blackouts because their power grid couldn't handle all of the excess power. And I think that would be a great example for every year our technology gets more powerful. Every year we get better monitors, we get better video games, we get better computers, we get better cameras, we get better TVs. And that's going to take more power, or more appliances, better appliances. That's going to take more power. And that is going to be extra juice that's going to have to be put on top of these energy productions, in which with wind and solar, if you don't have a variable, you have a large variable of how much energy that they're producing. That's just not applicable in a real life setting. You'll have, like what California had with the rolling blackouts. It's the same with wind power. You just don't know how much you're going to produce per day. It's an estimate. Now, another thing is if you look into wind power, for instance, the blades, non-recyclable. So that kind of defeats the purpose right there, saying that it's net carbon zero. It's not, because you can't recycle the blades. And they go straight to the dump, and they take hundreds of years to decompose, and that is counterproductive to what we're doing. It's the same thing with the solar panels. The solar panels can't be recycled either. They go straight to the dump. There are reports coming out from Russia, China, because they're huge into solar power. They have different types of generation of power. They use a special material called Viridium. It's only mined in 2 locations that they have currently released. There's a huge mine in Russia, and there's a small mine in Australia. That material is a little bit of a cheat for for green renewable energy. It has an unlimited discharge and recharge rate, as what the Russians have reported, so you can take that with a grain of salt. But so people will reference that. They're like, oh, China and Russia, they're using more solar, or they're using more renewable energy. Well, they have access to a material that we don't. And that would go back to a national security issue with, we should not be relying on Russia and China or Australia to meet our energy production needs. That is something that the United States needs to take an account for. The reason I say that is that because every time we rely on an outside source for energy, or an outside source for anything that is a requirement for here in the United States, that gives us less power in the world. So we have less leverage to do sanctions. We have less leverage for business because they will hold that over us. Now, if we go over to nuclear. Now, I know a lot of you are worried about nuclear. I mean, a lot of people will bring up Chernobyl, even though that did not happen in the United States, and that's Russian engineering for you. And the United States has a big reputation for redundancies. I mean, other nations will make fun of us for the amount of redundancies that we have. Nuclear power is completely safe. We have the redundancies needed in their designs to make them more applicable. On top of that, the reactors themselves, there is a reactor located in New York. It's called the Regina reactor. It is the smallest nuclear reactor in the United States, and it powers the same as much as 7 square miles of solar or 7 square miles of wind power. And that is the smallest reactor in the United States. So that shows you not just the potential, but the need for nuclear power. That would be able to lower costs and help lower income families better manage their money, and they'd be able to start putting that money towards maybe their child's education. They could hire tutors. They can put money towards college. They would be able to move out of worse neighborhoods. I mean, lowering costs for Americans will help every American. It'll help reduce a lot of stress that Americans are feeling now. Another thing that we need to take into account for nuclear energy is that these reactors are considered century reactors. So all the ones in the United States are rated to last a minimum of 100 years, and they have to be recertified every 25 years. Not only do they take the reactor into account, they also test the land to make sure that the land's still stable enough to support the nuclear reactors. They are constantly checking to make sure that everything is adequate. A way we could reduce costs and make nuclear energy more viable is to reduce the cost of regulations by giving out subsidies. What that means is, instead of reducing the amount of regulations, what we're doing is reducing the cost of the regulations. That way we can still keep the redundancies in place while at the same time making it less expensive for these companies and more viable. Because the hardest thing for nuclear power is the startup cost. The startup cost is extreme, while the maintenance cost is very low. Another thing to take into account are new reactors are coming out daily, such as a reactor called a Thorium Reactor. Thorium is an extremely cheap material, and they're currently testing for 3-to-1 ratios. So it would be 3 parts nuclear to 1 part thorium. They're estimating to be almost about 25% cheaper. We'll see how that number goes. That number, I wouldn't be surprised if it changed as time goes on. Another thing to take into account with nuclear is the amount of jobs that it will provide. I mean, most nuclear plants keep a fully staffed machine shop. They have multiple nuclear engineers. They keep medical staff on file. They produce really great, high-paying jobs, and which would be great for communities. And I'm not just saying we should just go 100% nuclear. It's always great to have different things, such as natural gas or synthetic natural gas. You could also use coal or solar and wind in small proportions. It's always good to diversify our power. But another thing we have to take into account is our power grid. Our power grid is in terrible shape. We definitely need to have an updated survey on it. We need to figure out how much energy it currently can handle, and we need to take into account what our energy needs are going to be in the next 10, 15, 20 years, because it doesn't matter it doesn't matter how we're producing the energy if we can't transfer the energy through our power lines, because we can't transfer our energy through the power lines. That's something we definitely need to take into account. We need to start taking into account our infrastructure, and we need to start taking into account not just how we're powering the United States, but the transfer of power. I hope a lot of you will start taking a look at this and start discussing what you think would be the best way for the United States to move forward with our energy production via solar, wind, hydro, nuclear. And I recommend that you take a look for it for yourself. I know a lot of people are very passionate about this, and I recommend to look at it. I mean, run the numbers yourself. Run how much it costs for energy for solar versus wind versus hydro versus nuclear. We all need to start looking at these facts ourselves and not relying on the politicians to do this for us. That will help start making the change that we need to start repairing our fractured power grid.